Good day! Again, I'm Mom Strawberry C. Versosa or simply Mom Straw. For today's lesson, we are going to discuss theories of evolution. Again, this is from our Pivot for a Learner's Packet or LEAP. There are many different theories which explains how different life forms exist. In the mid-18th century, most people believe in creationism. Creationism held the idea that all forms of life were created in its present form and they remain unchanged since the beginning. Do you know that even the famous Carl von Linnaeus, the father of taxonomy, believed in the fixity of species? So in this lesson, it will explain the occurrence of evolution. Are you ready? Okay, great. From the past lesson, we learned that fossil records and developmental and molecular biology are possible evidences of evolution. To prove that evolution did exist, scientists traveled and explored the world and came up with their own theories. And one of these is Charles Darwin. Here is the story of Charles Darwin's journey in his voyage to Galapagos Island in the Pacific Ocean. Listen carefully and try to answer the questions later. A long time ago, a small flock of sparrow-like bird called finches were blown out to the sea by a fierce storm. They lost their bearings but flew on in search of the mainland, going further and further out to sea. At the point of exhaustion, 600 miles from home, they spotted a speck of land, an island in the middle of the sea. They were saved and could rest, drink, and feed before returning home. But this island was perfect. It had abundant seeds and other food, plenty of shelter, nesting sites, and, amazingly, no predators or other birds to compete with. Life was much harder on the mainland. There was no need for the birds to move on. Their numbers grew until they became just a bit too numerous for the little island. Some found it hard to find enough food for themselves or for their offspring, and young birds were driven away from areas where food was available. Some birds were forced to fly across the sea to nearby island. There, they found new territories, also with no predators or other birds to compete with. As the plants and their seeds were just a little different on each island, some birds were better than others at finding and eating the new food sources. Birds which could break open fruits and eat the seeds survived well enough to produce lots of babies. Eventually, after a very long time, all the islands became occupied by these birds, but the finches on each island were slightly different. After hearing the story, let's have our learning task number 1. These are the guide questions. Number 1. Explain why it is unlikely that more than one flock of birds would find the islands in this way at the same time. For question number 2, suggest 2 possible reasons why there were no predators on the island. Number 3, why were there no other birds to compete with? Number 4, why might some finches survive better than others on the same food sources? Lastly, we have question number 5, why were the finches slightly different on each island? So now, let's discuss about theories of evolution. Who is Jean-Baptiste de Lamarck? A French naturalist who published a book entitled Zoological Philosophy, wherein he presented his idea about evolution. Lamarck was the first biologist who offered a concrete hypothesis to explain how plants and animals might have evolved. Lamarck made 3 major theories or assumptions. These are theories of needs, theories of use and disuse, and theories of acquired characteristics. So this is Lamarck's visualization of giraffe during the early times. So what can you notice? Obviously, the neck of the first one is shorter compared to the second and the third one, which is the giraffe na alam natin, di ba? So let us discuss the three theories in terms of Lamarck's giraffes. First, let's have theory of needs. Theory of needs states that organisms change in response to their environment. Their ability to survive help them develop characteristics necessary for them to adapt in a given environment. So, theory of needs. So, sa pangangailangan. Kung kailangan niya magbago. Sabi ni Lamarck, noon daw ay mga ancestors daw ng giraffe ay with shorter neck daw talaga. And alam naman natin na ang ating mga giraffe ay herbivores. Kaso nagkaroon ng tagtuyot. So yung mga halaman o pagkain na naaabot nila o abot lang nila ay sobrang daling naubos. At dahil din marami rin yung population nila doon. Pero may mga natirang trees. Kaso hindi nila yun abot. So, para mag-survive sila, kailangan nila magbago para maabot yung food nila. So, kung may need sila, kailangan nilang mag-adapt o magbago. Again, yun ay kay Lamarck. Punta naman tayo sa theories of use and disuse. So, ano nga ba ang theory of use and disuse? Again, this is according to Lamarck. Organ not in use will disappear while organ in use will develop. So let's go back to the first theory. Again, sabi nga ni Lamarck, kaya humaba daw ang neck ng giraffe dahil sa kailangan nilang maabot yung matataas na trees. Kaya aabutin nila iyon sa kanilang makakaya. So, ano nga ba ang pinagkaiba ng use and disuse para dito sa ating theory of use and disuse? For use, the part of the body that is used becomes stronger and will develop more. While sa disuse, parts that are unused become weaker then eventually magdi-disappear. Kaya nga daw na-develop ang longer neck ng giraffe dahil lagi nga nila itong nagagamit. Again, this is according to John Baptiste D. Lamarck. Lastly, we have theory of acquired characteristics. Ano nga ba ang meron dyan? Parent animals could pass on its offspring the characteristic it had acquired during its lifetime. Thus, the offspring would inherit those characteristics that have become enlarged because of the excessive use, or that which has grown smaller from disuse. Since napahaba ni parent giraffe yung neck nila, so possible daw na maipasa itong traits na ito sa mga anak nila. But, sa palagay nyo, if you change the color of your hair from black to blonde, do you think your child can inherit the blonde color of your hair? And sa tingin nyo, a young lady keeps on using whitening soap and become fair. Can her child inherit her acquired fairness? Many scientists rejected theories of Lamarck. They understood that if there were change in cell or body structure, there could be a changes in genetic information of the species. Today, Lamarck's idea was proven to be incorrect. Phenotypic changes acquired during an organism's lifetime cannot pass on to the next organism or to the next generation. So let's have a simple example. Cutting the cat's tail will not produce kitten without tail, right? Then, Charles Darwin proposed the more popular theory of evolution based on natural selection, which is different from theories of Lamarck. According to Darwin, giraffe species originally have varying neck lengths, but natural selection favored the survival of giraffes with longer neck that could feed on the taller trees due to lack of accessible food supply. 50 years after Lamarck's theory of use and disuse, Charles Darwin suggested the theory of natural selection. After his voyage to Galapagos Island in HMS Beagle, he was fascinated by the diversity of organisms he found along his journey. In Galapagos Island, he observed that finch species have different beak structures for different food types. The abundance of certain finch species in an island was somehow related to the type of available food for these birds. In 1859, Charles Darwin published his book on the origin of species by means of natural selection. Here are the four main principles of Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection: variation, overproduction, adaptation, and descent with modification. First, variation. Differences among members of a population that could be passed on to the next generation. Variations are the basis for natural selection. Overproduction. Having many offspring increases the chance that some of them will survive. These offspring will compete for resources, for example, for the food, shelter, and water. And very few survive long enough to reproduce. Next is adaptation. Set of genetically acquired traits that make the organism better suited to its environment. Individuals with advantageous adaptations are more likely to survive and reproduce than those individuals lacking the adaptations. Last one, we have descent with modification. Over time, all individuals will exhibit the beneficial traits. So let's now have our learning task number 2. These are the guide questions. Based on the discussion, answer the following questions. Number 1. Who is Charles Darwin? How did he think species evolve? Number 2. What is adaptation? Number 3. What is natural selection? Number 4. What does the phrase survival of the fittest mean? And number 5. How are the concepts of natural selection and survival of the fittest related? Then we have our learning task number 3. In our learning task number 3, you are going to compare and contrast the theories of Lamarck and Darwin. Then learning task number 4. Multiple choice. Choose the letter of the best answer. Number 1. Who observed the variation of organism in Galapagos Island? A. Charles Darwin, B. Charles Lyell, C. John Baptiste de Lamarck, D. James Hutton. Number 2. Who proposed the theory of acquired characteristics? A. Charles Darwin, B. Charles Lyell, C. John Baptiste de Lamarck, D. James Hutton. What concept states that having many offspring increases the chance that some of them will survive? A. Adaptation, B. Descent with modification, C. Overproduction, D. Variation. Number 4. What theory states that organ not in use will disappear while organ in use will develop? A. Theory of acquired characteristics, B. Theory of evolution, C. Theory of natural selection, D. Theory of use and disuse. Question number 5. Camels and cacti are adapted to live in dry places like desert. What concept does it exhibit? A. Adaptation, B. Overproduction, C. Survival of the fittest, D. Variation. Again, for our reflection, you are going to write your personal insights about the lesson. I understand that, I realize that, and I need to learn more about. So I'm hoping that you understand our lesson. And for our references, we have Science 10, Learner's Materials, pages 316 to 327. And again, pivot 4A, Learner's Packet or LEAP. Again, special thanks to Jeanette B. Katangi and Nicanor O. Reyes II. Also, we have Canva for the templates of our presentation. That's all for today. Again, I'm Ma'am Strawberry C. Versosa or Ma'am Straw. Thank you and God bless.